The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Santiago Peña Palacios, President of the Republic of Paraguay. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Santiago Peña Palacios, President of the Republic of Paraguay, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Presidente de la Asamblea General.
President of the General Assembly, distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished ministers of foreign affairs, my dear wife Leticia, my son Gastolo, Constanza Serenella, ladies and gentlemen, in 1945, the representatives of 51 states, one of them my country, agreed to create the United Nations. Speaking for the first time at this august assembly as President of the Republic of Paraguay, I wish to begin my statement by expressing our gratitude to the United Nations for its work, because since the beginning it has provided a global framework for cooperation between nations to promote peace, human rights, and the well-being of peoples. 78 years later, multilateralism faces very visible challenges in terms of efficacy and legitimacy. In a world of so much wealth, levels of poverty and inequality continue to be stubbornly high, while mass migration due to armed conflicts and a lack of opportunities, international terrorism, transnational crime and geopolitical tensions pose challenges that cooperation mechanisms and governance that have prevailed over the last 8 decades are clearly behind in responding to. The lack of tangible results, inefficacy perceived in multilateral institutions, and difficulties in addressing global problems in an effective manner have led to frustration and have led to an increase in the sense that national interests should prevail over multilateral cooperation. The imposition of certain trends or cultural or ideological approaches is perceived, not wrongly, as interference in sovereignty and in national values that erodes trust and weakens willingness to cooperate in the multilateral sphere. As a result, we are seeing growing levels of distrust between member states that makes cooperation and the willingness to commit to things of common good difficult. The 2008 crisis, the pandemic, and now the conflict in Ukraine have laid bare the weaknesses and the limitations of multilateral institutions in their ability to tackle global challenges and systemic risks. The United Nations, in the last case, and its Security Council have adopted measures whose results, sadly, are far from being encouraging. Despite having suffered the misfortune of 2 unfair wars, one that put us to the edge of extinction as a nation, the spirit and the history of Paraguay compel us to choose dialogue and not force as a mechanism to settle any dispute. And this is shown in the Gondra Convention of 1924, proposed by a distinguished Paraguayan and approved by all Latin American countries unanimously without a single amendment, and its purpose was precisely to avoid and to prevent wars between states in the Americas. Humbly, however, with a sense of conviction, we are all in We urge for all parties involved in this conflict to immediately put an end to military actions and to avoid further victim and harm. We support peace initiatives driven forward by Brazil, a kindred country and a strategic ally, as well as by Pope Francis, whose moving presence is a source of inspiration for the whole of humanity. There can be no doubt that we need to work to revise and to reform the mechanisms, means, and institutional capacities of multilateral organizations in order to avoid new wars like the one that is afflicting Ukraine. However, with or without reforms, we need to put an end to the terrible loss of so many human lives. We must work to strengthen the United Nations in order to build new capacities to enable us to respond effectively and efficiently to the ongoing and changing global challenges. When it comes to the reform and expansion of the Security Council, Paraguay believes that the organic and functional structure of the United Nations should reflect the dynamics of the international stage in a participatory, democratic, and equitable manner, as observed in the guiding principles of the Charter, to promote peace, security, and prosperity in our countries in equal conditions. In this regard, the government of Paraguay expresses its support to the Republic of China, Taiwan, to become a comprehensive part of the United Nations system. Climate change is a great global challenge, and we must adopt both rigorous as well as fair measures to avoid further damage to the planet and its inhabitants. Trade restrictions based on criteria such as agricultural practices or environmental standards are bringing about discontent and uncertainty, and they are unfair and discriminatory barriers because they seek to extrapolate realities from highly developed regions to developing countries, and they do not take account of their differences, nor do they adequately value the practices to mitigate the environmental effects in these areas. This implies that LDCs should assume responsibility for the environmental damage caused by industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries when mitigation measures didn't exist, and have the obligation to do this rather at the expense of turning down opportunities for trade expansion, creating jobs and wealth. It is necessary to address these concerns and to promote a more equitable and collaborative approach that takes account of the specific needs and realities of each country in the context of multilateral decisions related to environmental standards. Paraguay has shown the world that we are leaders in hydroelectric energy. We are a clean and sustainable source that meets both our own domestic needs as well as the needs of our neighbours. We have put Paraguay on the map as an example to follow in the transition to a more sustainable world. While other countries are still discussing reducing emissions, we have already taken concrete and effective measures. We are a concrete example of how a nation can use natural resources in a responsible and sustainable manner to promote economic development and at the same time to mitigate climate change. For more than 30 years, we have been adopting sustainable agro-fisheries practices that do not only ensure a prosperous future for our farmers, but also they guarantee the integrity of our land and our water resources. We have acted with a sense of courage and responsibility, basing our public policies on science and on evidence. For years, we were subject to criticism and finger-pointing, unfair finger-pointing. However, today, thanks to the work of several governments, I can certainly tell you that the facts speak for themselves. 44% of Paraguayan territory has conserved its forests. 95% of the legumes and cereals sowed in Paraguay in 2022 are using sustainable technology such as direct sowing and crop rotation. And we've been free from deforestation since 2004 as a result of our zero deforestation policy. This data is a testament to the fact that it is possible to strike a balance between agricultural production and the conservation of our natural resources. And the Paraguayan countryside is ready to enter the most demanding international markets, respecting the principles of clean and sustainable production. However, we will not stop there. Paraguay is also committed to overhauling our natural ecosystems. We're promoting the reforestation and conservation of species, and we have undertaken the National Participatory Plan for Forest Restoration. We have also significantly reduced extreme poverty over the last 2 decades, showing that it is possible to protect our environment while prospering economically at the same time. Paraguay reaffirms its commitment to the values and to the central objectives of the United Nations. We understand our responsibilities. However, they are differentiated, and we are prepared to lead with example on the path to a more sustainable and equitable world. Today, we face 4 global challenges that are causing geopolitical tensions: access to water, food security, energy sufficiency, and the resilience of logistical chains. Because Paraguay is a power on these matters, we are called to be protagonists in the concert of nations. We have the largest global underwater reserves of fresh water, including the Guarani aquifer that we share with our neighbours. Paraguay is a global supplier of food, being one of the few countries in the world that is able to produce food for its population and for 100 million more people around the world. In hydroelectric energy, we are pioneers in regional electricity integration, and today we have decided to move towards even more efficiency and energy sustainability. Paraguay aspires to become the logistical centre of the South American bi-ocean road corridor, which turns our geographical central location into an opportunity and strengthens our integration with neighbouring countries and markets in the Pacific. This trade corridor will be a source of renovation and empowerment for Mercosur and the Alliance of the Pacific, promoting cooperation between both blocs. Further, thanks to the Paraguay-Paraná hydroway, this multimodal network will become the most competitive transporter of different products, facilitating the management of river transport. Without a doubt, this will give a fresh impulse to the process of South American integration and will transform the vision to resolve conflicts that may arise. Paraguay is determined to abandon the old image of an island surrounded by land, as described by the Cervantes laureate of Paraguay, Augusto Roa Bastos, and following our historic, geographical and cultural vocation to become the centre of South American integration. One of our main objectives is to contribute to improving regional integration. In this regard, the aquifers, the bi-ocean corridor, hydroelectric power stations, and navigation on our rivers are delicate processes of balance between integration and the sovereignty of our peoples. We are aware that the progress achieved towards integration, that progress has been achieved towards integration. However, we are far from being satisfied, and we are making progress with courage and determination. Latin America is the region of the world with the highest potential for development. However, we will only be able to develop this potential if we respect ourselves, working together and in harmony, and by respecting each other. Since the last century, the 20th century, we have been moving as a country into a process whereby we are building and strengthening our democratic institutions. This year, we renewed this in our country with a transparent electoral process with broad participation from our citizens, where the Paraguayan people expressed their will with a firm democratic vocation and vested their trust in the rule of law. Paraguay today is living through the longest period of democratic coexistence, with more than 35 uninterrupted years of the values of free, participatory and pluralist democracy, convinced that there is no other acceptable system than being unshakable in upholding human rights and liberty. Paraguay, the country of the prose of Augusto Roa Bastos, the universal music of José Asunción Flores, and guitar with its dulcet tones and Ñanduti lace, Berta Roas. This country has a real rhythm that was born in the spirit of the Guarani language. Now, we call this thing Guarania, and it goes around the world. It's a great ambassador for us. My country values peace and sustainable development and integration between peoples, because we are a country that has been reborn from the ashes, following a war of extermination that stunted the early development process of a nation that, at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, had already developed one of the first interurban railways of South America. We had shipyards and iron foundries, but above all, we had great human capital and education. Then the massacre in 1870 that annihilated 90% of the male population of Paraguay. The reconstruction process after this was headed up by patriotic compatriots without financial nor technological support, and with a small flow of European migrants that arrived and established themselves in the country despite this bad record. However, as Bernardino Caballero said in his presidential message in 1884, Paraguay has the undeniable merit of having risen from the rubble without having requested support from the outside. We have been steadfast in this, the virtue of the strong, and triumphed, being the maker of our own destiny. It's impossible to not mention the fundamental role of Paraguayan women in their heroic task to rebuild the country. This is not in vain, because Paraguayan women are recognized as the greatest in the Americas, and they are the cornerstone of our nation. With decisive and firm steps forward, Paraguay continues to strengthen its institutionality and its economy. Having been the poorest country in South America for decades, today we are a middle to high income country with high credibility for the international financial markets that are bring us close to the so yearned for investment graduation with high standards for production, certified production in line with international standards, and transparency, especially in macroeconomic stability and fiscal discipline and monetary discipline, in an ongoing effort to improve public management. Dear friends of the international community, Paraguay is stood to attention and is ready to discharge its mission before history. Thus, we are talking about the rise of a giant. However, we are not saying this in an expansionist way or a grandiose way, but rather with a firm conviction of a proud people, proud of its roots and our heroic history, our courageousness, and the profound conviction of our destiny of greatness. Thank you very much.
Thank the President of the Republic of Paraguay for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.